It's been a journey. As a mental health consumer, a person with who's a survivor of mental illness, so to speak, I when I became aware of the recovery community and the fact that I had choices and that forced treatment wasn't necessarily the answer to everything, and that there were other things. That there were other, I wouldn't say alternatives, but other things to really complement medication and clinical services. And you can say I came of age really during that period of time. And so my initial perceptions of assisted outpatient treatment were very much colored by my own personal experience, having and really never having had to really utilize forced treatment, always being, even with the one major hospitalization that I had, it really being voluntary. I was in the best shape when I volunteered to go into the hospital, but nevertheless, it was I was lucid. I was able to make certain decisions, and in the scheme of things, it was a relatively short period of time for the initial onset of manic depression. So I was fortunate. Over the past 7 years, my attitude both towards treatment, clinical services, the issue of choice has really been transformed in many ways, or in many ways it complements the other half of me as a consumer. I have a 30-year-old son who, at the age of 19, began to exhibit some, what I characterized as, based on my own experiences, the initial onset of manic depression, which the literature shows us that that's typically for males when the onset occurs. I was pretty fortunate because my onset was kind of after I'd graduated from college, graduated from law school, practiced law for a while. But the trajectory of his experience was very different than mine. And so I think more than anything, I think I was more fearful for him and his future as an African American male living in a city than I was for myself. I think I had a lot of other assets at 33 that he did not have, and the like. So he began to exhibit. He was up. He did things like he spray painted his bedroom. He was enrolled. He was very ambivalent about college, and I think I didn't pick up on the cues. As a highly motivated professional woman, I just figured he was lazy. He was rebelling the way that kids do. Like, I'm not going to do what my parents did. I'm just gonna. And he's always been a free spirit. He's always marched the beat of his own drum. And so I was concerned, but then I said maybe he's just artistic, and this is how he's choosing to express himself. But his self-care slowly began to really deteriorate. He stopped bathing, he stopped interacting with his friends, he broke up with his girlfriend, he was very tearful, he would have crying jags for hours upon hours upon hours of time. And so at that point I was very concerned, and I reached out to a mobile crisis team that came in, and they were wonderful. They were from a city hospital, they were young, they were enthusiastic, they connected with him, or tried to connect with him. But he wouldn't come out of his bedroom. He would not engage with them at all. And they came to my house probably 7 times to try to engage him. And so over the period of about a 7 or 8 year period, he was in and out of city hospitals. We get 30 days. He'd be hospitalized for 30 days, get out, have a treatment plan with clinical services, day treatment program, and all the other things. And he would do it for about a week or two, and then he'd stop. And often the referral was to a type of a program that wasn't really appropriate for a 17, 18, 19, a young adult. There weren't many people his age at the programs. None of the clinicians were African American. None of them were male. No one really related to him, and it was very clear. So his dad and I really decided at that point, probably about 2 or 3 years into his illness, I had a colleague who was a private psychologist who I'd worked with in the community, and he went to the psychologist and he wasn't taking medication at the time, for about 2.5 years, and then stopped. And at that point, I can remember vividly, it was literally the week that President Obama was elected, I had to call 911 because he had stripped down naked in my living room and had gone in the refrigerator and just pulled everything out. And he wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating, he was just he was just in a frenzy. Luckily, I called the 911 team that came, and I think it's important to note that they were women, and they engaged him, got him dressed. That began his first 30-day stay, and that was a cycle that continued and continued and continued until literally November this year. His last stay at a city hospital was for about 40 days between October and November, and in December he was he refused treatment all during the stay with the city hospital, and in December the hospital went to court to get with an assisted outpatient treatment order. And at that point, he had cut me and his dad out of his treatment. He wouldn't sign consents or anything. So the only way that we found out about it was very difficult to find out when the dates of the hearings were, any of the details, or, luckily we were able to get information. We went, he refused to show up. So each time he refused to show up, the outpatient treatment order was extended. And at this point in time, he's at Creemore Hospital, which is a state hospital, which is very different than it used to be in Queens, New York, and he's been there he's still there as of today. But he is much better today than he's ever been over the last 10 years. And I think it is attributable to the fact that I think the assisted outpatient the order for the medication worked, because I don't think he was going to take medication on his own, and the medication stabilizes him. He's not on very high doses of medication, but he's on medication enough so that his symptoms don't overtake him. He's engaged he's taking computer classes, he's writing his poetry again, he wants his guitar, he's doing fine. The last report I got from one of his friends was that he's really engaged. We're playing basketball, and he still wants to get out of here, but he's doing much better. As well as his social worker has been able not to give us very specific information, but just say he's okay, he's better. So I would say I have a 180-degree view of assisted outpatient treatment, as I feel that there are certain circumstances under which it really can save a life. As an African-American male, my concern was that my son was going to get killed, that someone was going to see him behaving erratically, and they weren't going to say he's mentally ill or there's other challenge. And so literally his dad and I have really come to the conclusion that AOT saved his life, because he was headed really either suicide or some other self-harm, or really having an adverse encounter with the police leading to either injury, death, or incarceration, because he was engaged in some pretty, not necessarily criminal behavior, but risky behavior.